Hello and welcome to Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. This is where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues and the reporting of some of the week's top stories. Thanks for joining us. I'm Peter Ndor and this is what's coming up on the show. We'll be discussing how corruption has impacted the media industry, and we take a closer look at the opportunities that have been lost through corrupt practices. We'll be touching base with Gangster State author Peter Louis Myburgh, who launched the book this past week in Johannesburg in the midst of a violent disruption, allegedly by supporters of ANC Secretary General Ace Magashule. We'll also take a look at what students at the University of the Tshwane University of Technology in Pretoria have to say about the upcoming elections and what their expectations are. These are just some of the stories that we'll be tackling on the show, but first let's take a look at what's on the front pages of your Sunday newspapers this morning. Well, the Sunday Times is leading with a story that talks about the millions to be spent on sprucing up houses occupied by ministers and other government buildings. There's 750 million rand to be spent on upgrades and maintenance. It's seen by some as wasteful at a time when South Africans are battling with price increases. Now, one of the items is allegedly 1 million rand to be spent on upgrading a minister's bathroom and kitchen. The City Press has focused on the ANC election party list, with the report saying that some key figures have been cited by the party's integrity committee as problematic candidates. The 22 people named include the Deputy President David Mabuza, National Chairperson of the ANC Gwere Mantashe, and other ministers Nomvula Mokonyane, Batabile Dlamini, Zweli Mkhize and Bheki Cele. The Sunday Independent is headlining a story that talks about the finger-pointing by political parties at each other as communities across the country have been protesting to highlight their demands. On the front page of the Sunday Tribune, the story there is carrying a story of more xenophobic attacks in KwaZulu-Natal, this time moving to the rural areas in the south coast. Apparently, a group of people butchered 17 cows on a farm belonging to a man they accuse of employing Zimbabweans. And finally, the Weekend Argus is leading with the ANC Secretary General Ace Magashule busy on the campaign trail in the Western Cape, allegedly handing out cash to supporters and telling them not to vote for white people as they are angry with the ANC and its leaders. So a lot to get through on the show, and helping us to make sense of these stories, my guest editors today are veteran journalist and columnist Opa Ngwenya and strategic communications specialist Makosini Mgijwa, himself also a long-time journalist and political commentator. Very good morning to my guests, and we'll chat to them shortly. Now, this time last week on the program, we were discussing the front pages of two major Sunday newspapers and a book that was published called Gangster State, Unraveling Ace Magashule's Web of Capture by Peter Louis Myburgh. Perhaps predictably, reaction was swift, especially from supporters of the ANC Secretary General. But what was a surprise was the violent disruption of the book's launch in Johannesburg. This, as the ANC Youth League in the Free State was promising to burn the books at a special event. Magashule and the ANC have distanced themselves from the violence and the threats that many saw as a trampling on freedom of speech. Now, the book's author, investigative journalist Peter Louis Myburgh, joins me now via Skype. Peter, thanks very much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Peter, and good morning to your viewers. Thanks for having me.
All right, so you must have been disappointed at the disruption that took place, and violent in nature as well. For many people, that must have been quite disturbing when your book was launched.
Absolutely, Peter. You know, I think on the one hand, these kind of books unpack and sort of highlight very concerning issues around governance issues, and then the launch events that go along with the release of such a book are really ideal platforms for people to come and engage about the issues raised in the book And we really welcome the opportunity to, even those who were critical of the book, to entertain their views and to allow them to contribute to the discussion, especially in the question and answer session. And they, of course, completely rejected that proposal and instead chose to tour through the store and steal, books and tear books. And it was a very disappointing behavior on display from an organization that traditionally actually prides itself in grappling with complex issues in an intellectual manner.
Did you expect this kind of backlash? I mean, this isn't the first time that you've written investigative pieces.
Absolutely, Peter. Yeah, so going back to 2015, we worked on the PRASA corruption, the multi-billion rand train contracts. And that certainly was also met by quite a strong backlash and criticism from people implicated in that issue. This time around, it was certainly raised to a different level. It was quite a vehement attack from the party itself. Of course, we saw that statement on the Sunday, quite a strong and aggressive set of allegations about, myself forming part of some sort of a Stratcom operation. So I think the lack of a, logical, satisfactory response from the party has been quite astounding. And then on the public side, the positive thing from all of this is that the public seems to have responded very positively to a book that brings further information that is absolutely in the public interest on the handling of government affairs by senior politicians.
All right, so people, inevitably questioning the timing, and I just wonder if you can help us. This kind of book doesn't happen overnight. How long did you have to investigate it and put it together? Because you would have had to anticipate, I've got to time this so that it gets released on such a date. This has been a long work in progress, I guess.
Yeah, Peter, certainly. The timing issue is now kind of one point of criticism that forms part of these allegations that it's a concerted effort to discredit people in the party or the party itself shortly before the elections. That is not the case. My interest in these particular spheres of government precedes the current election cycle. Anybody with access to Google can go and research my work I've done for News 24 on Mr. Magashule and corrupt networks in the Free State. It goes back to many months before the current election cycle kicked off last year, most prominently. And I always like to counter that accusation of the timing issue by asking people, do they suggest I delay issues that are in the public interest until after the elections to benefit Mr. Magashule or a faction of the ANC, which in itself is very much a political decision too.
All right, so the Secretary General has said that he's considering his legal options. You welcome that? You'd love to get this tested in a court of law?
Yeah, definitely, Peter. It's a well-researched and well-founded piece of, investigative journalism. It goes through the normal legal vetting processes that we put in place when we publish on platforms like News 24, Daily Maverick too. And certainly in that sense, it's something that would stand the test of time or stand against scrutiny in a court of law. I think corruption issues have too infrequently, been playing out in courts of law because of a paralysis in our law enforcement environment. So if there's an opportunity to take these issues and let them play out in a court of law, I think in terms of the public interest and in terms of further exposing and stemming corruption, it would be a certainly most welcomed development from our side.
All right, so then perhaps finally, again, more disappointments that the launch in Cape Town was cancelled. And I suppose some might say that when this kind of thing happens, those that were trying to disrupt it in the first place are perhaps the winners.
Certainly a sad day, I think, for free speech and, our constitutionally enshrined rights to debate freely and embark on or participate in robust debate. Last week's developments were definitely a bit sad in that regard. Thankfully, with the help of Daily Maverick Insider, Prime Media, and a couple of other role players in the media sphere, we were able to put together a launch event in Cape Town regardless. And ultimately, society in general needs to ask itself some very tough questions. We have this terrible history in this country where free speech was repressed by a apartheid regime that absolutely detested, anything that was critical of that, of the government of the day, the removal and censorship of books and stifling of free and open speech and open engagements. This is a very sort of concerning trend, last week's events. If you consider that, the ANC itself, ironically, fought so hard to, ensure we put in place a new government and a constitution that protects journalists and protects free speech and allows us to, in a, safe manner, engage in discussions, even if those discussions entail difficult issues for the powers of the day.
All right, so Peter, thanks very much indeed for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us around your book and the events of last week. Thanks so much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
All right, so that was Peter Louw-Myburgh, the author of the book Gangster State, talking to us about what he feels has been a trampling of freedom of speech. And he's managed to get the book launched finally in Cape Town. There was issues at the V&A waterfront saying that they were cancelling it because they were worried about security. All right, we'll continue looking at that and other stories right after this. Right, let's chat. Guest editors, Marcus and Opangwenya. Gentlemen, thanks very much indeed. A lot to get through, but just quick comments really on this whole book and this disruption. The ANC has distanced itself from it. There were people that were there that some people recognized as having come from as far as the Free State to be at the book and the launch itself. What does it suggest? Are people making calculated risks, or they're just not really reading the temperature? What do you think about the events of this past week?
Let me start with the issue that you raised with Peter, which is the timing of the book. I think if you are going to, the book is going to be released a few weeks before the election, you better have, you should have better talking points than what he said. Because he seems to suggest that, well, the process itself put us at this time for launch and everybody must accept that's how it is. He must also accept that that damages his credibility and the credibility of the book to a certain extent to a specific group of people who may be seeing their idol or Ace Magashule being deliberately sidelined or something to that effect. And then one thing that I would like to add also, it is that, the people that were there, making those disruptions, they were doing that as ANC people and, defending their Secretary General. And the ANC has distanced itself. I don't think distancing itself is enough. I think there has to be serious, I nearly said concomitant action, but there has to be some action that shows that, the ANC finds this behavior revolting.
Opa, your thoughts on what you saw?
I think it's not helpful for either the ANC or the people who are aggrieved about the book. But what it struck me is that we seem not to have learned from the lessons of history. It's not the first time that this happens. In 1947, a book by Khalil Gibran, Spirits Rebellious, was not only banned, but literally fires were organized in Beirut for the burning of the book. And it was raising an issue of the clergy who were not dealing justifiably with the poor. Secondly, you'd remember Salman Rushdie wrote a book, Satanic Verses. Instead of people engaging the book, they took the stance that is similar to what is happening in Sandton. So in my view, the repeat of these things indicate that we're not learning anything from history and we're bound to repeat those mistakes. And people who have not engaged in the content of the book are bound to tear the pages of the book and ban it instead of engaging with its content. And it's not enough for me for Esmagashule to distance himself from the actions of those people, because ostensibly they were doing it for the love of him. He should actively say, do not do it in my name. That's more proactive and more positive than just distancing himself, because he is not an innocent bystander in this whole fracas.
All right, you mentioned the timing, and I'm just wondering, because Peter said, look, you know, if it's something important in the public interest, should he have done it much earlier, or should he have waited, or release when it's released?
Look, you release when you are ready to release, but you must also be conscious about what is happening around the time that you launch. And if you must launch anyway, I'm saying you better have better talking points. You know, you better be in a position to explain convincingly, because otherwise, you know, it becomes unhelpful to people who are paranoid. It becomes unhelpful. Look, there are problems inside the ANC. The first page of City Press, as we'll be talking about it, will show that. If you say that the Deputy President of the Republic and Deputy President of the ANC has his name being raised by the Integrity Committee, that's because you're going to have a much smaller cabinet. You've got two factions vying for positions. So the environment is a very dangerous one. So you ought to be careful so that you are not sucked into you know, those conspiracies. I'm not saying he shouldn't have released it. I'm saying he should have anticipated. They should have anticipated. The publishers should have anticipated and hired a PR firm to help them with the launch.
All right, and then Opa, perhaps a final thought on this. Do you think that the ANC has been damaged by this, or is this just a bump in the road?
Well, currently our politics are loyalty-based and personality-driven. So people may still perhaps even feel more fueled to defend who they love the most based on their loyalties. So rather than looking at the issue and the ethical aspects that the book is raising, it's about corruption. And corruption has been bedeviling the country. It is poisoning society. It's polarizing its communities. So people have to come to terms with the reality as it confronts us, than just digging their heads into the sand like ostriches.
All right, so we're going to talk a little bit more about corruption after this break, and so I'm inviting you to stay with us. You're watching Media Monitor.
When thinking about the hassle of switching medical aid, Thuli has an epiphany. Bonita's let her apply online and a human phones her back. No long forms, no on-hold music. That's real medical aid. Exciting.
Die volgende partypolitieke advertensie is deur die betrokke party betaal. Die menings wat in hierdie advertensie uitgespreek word, is die van die politieke party en nie van die SABC nie.
It's not about xenophobia.
There are many issues of service delivery, housing, illegal mushrooming of structures.
They
are now starting to move to Sandton and to submit a memorandum.
You're not going with tires there. That's all. I will stop this march here.
When we were burning tires in the inner Alexandra, they kept quiet because now we are going where they report. That is why they are having a problem.
We feel really undermined and disrespected that he did not show up to listen to our grievances. He has grown a tendency of only serving the so-called white monopoly capital and has forgotten about black communities. Development must happen either or of all sides because we are equally Batu.
But the people here today are saying service delivery to us, we deserve it.
Welcome back. You're watching Media Monitor. Now, this past week, the Group Managing Director of Park Advertising, Chris Buerta, wrote an interesting piece online that pointed to the significant impact corruption has been having on media revenues. The State Capture Commission of Inquiry, a number of books, and what feels like hundreds of stories in the media have been revealing the staggering amount of money lost through corrupt activities. It's hard to quantify, but it's believed to be well into the hundreds of billions. This has affected the economy and in turn media revenues in areas such as advertising. To help us unpack this, let's chat once again to our guest editors. Gents, thanks very much for joining us. So often when we look at corruption, we just think of the parties involved, but it does have a ripple effect, and eventually it hits the man on the street. The media industry as well, particularly vulnerable in an economic downturn. The rest of the world seems to be picking up in terms of their economies, but we certainly are not going in the same direction. I just wonder what your thoughts are on how this corruption has cascaded down, particularly into businesses that have to cut their advertising budgets.
Look, you know, let me tell you just a short story. When I worked here at the SABC between 1999 and 2003, I had the fortune of traveling across the continent, accompanying who was then President Thabo Mbeki for the SABC. We used to go to the Broadcasting Corporation of Zambia and Zimbabwe so that we could send our packages and feed using the satellite connection. In Zambia, you know, the state broadcaster there, it was just unbelievable. It was the state of disrepair and everything. And I found the same thing with the Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation. And one gentleman told me that what you see here are the results of corruption. Right? If you look at this studio, would you believe that so much money was spent on it? And I walk into the SABC now, 13 years later, it's a shadow of its former self. Now, it's practical. You can see the effects of corruption because money was allocated to be spent on something, but it wasn't. But coming back to your question now directly, if you have the mismanagement, maladministration, and corruption that you had here, it eventually impacted your viewership, your listenership, right? And it's very difficult to get those people back. Now, with viewership going down and listenership going down, so will the advertising. And the people who are going to be impacted are the workers. And then now you have to talk about retrenching people when that is a creation of corruption. And I think that, you know, all of us, the commentators, media, and other people, we sometimes find reasons to explain or to justify wrongdoing. And now you see it impacting people in a practical way.
Yeah. Opa, talking about viewership, another piece was written where it was suggested that, okay, so we've got load shedding. We're starting to hear that a lot of corruption helped get us to the point of load shedding. The load shedding now affected our ability to watch television programs. And some of the viewership dropped by as much as 35% as a result of load shedding. And that, of course, again translates into losses of revenue.
I think it indicates that corruption has no free zones. It's affecting all aspects of our lives. And number two is that I personally believe that the media is not an innocent bystander in society. It equally has self-interested positions that it holds and promotes. But for me, the media is a necessary evil, without which greater evil will remain unchallenged, concealed, and unknown. So the more it is exposed, we have to live with the fact that we will do better with media, with whatever its limitations, because without it, the worst could happen in society.
All right, so we're talking about the media, and if we are to believe what we heard at the State Capture Inquiry, some journalists actually took money. And, you know, sometimes, again, we don't see the effects on the man on the street when a journalist is part of that corruption process.
You know, that's the easiest problem regarding the media to talk about. The more complex one is, I'll tell you this, without the media, the project of state capture and corruption would have been very difficult. Some in the media aided and abetted corruption, some knowingly, some unknowingly. You know, if you want to corrupt people in a public service, there has to be a stick and a carrot, right? The carrot, of course, is simple. You'll get money, do corruption, allow corruption, you'll get money. The stick is that if you don't do the corrupt things that we want you to do, we are going to deal with you. Everybody has their skeletons in the cupboards. Those skeletons in the cupboards, they were not taken by politicians and spread wherever by politicians themselves. They give them to journalists. Right? Yeah. So we want to punish a certain person because he's blocking our way, we can't eat. We are going to find his skeletons in the cupboard, put it in the front page of a newspaper, we discredited him, we finished him. Now, what I find the media to be wrong at is that instead of saying, someone gave me this information, I followed it and it checked out, but here it is, but also know that it comes from someone. You know, I made the last time I was here, I made the example about that Washington Post story that led the Watergate, that led to the resignation of Richard Nixon. They told you about Deep Throat, that there's a guy who was later revealed to have been an FBI agent. So if a newspaper says, our own investigation has revealed this, so you're owning the story, you're owning its intentions, and you are hiding the person, the real person that you should be exposing. You are hiding them. So that's how the media has allowed corruption. It wouldn't have happened without the media. People would tell us of the 9 wasted years of Jacob Zuma. Jacob Zuma wouldn't have been president without the media. 2005, 2006, 2007, he was newsmaker at least twice. What was he doing? What was he saying? He was singing Mshingwami, throwing shade at Thabo Mbeki, getting coverage almost every day on television. And then now it's the media now that wants to tell us that he's corrupt. You know, he shouldn't be given any benefit or anything like that.
All right, and perhaps a final thought on this one. I'm just wondering, are the people who are paying the bribes perhaps stating or over-believing the influence actually that the media still has, given the world of social media? But also we're now starting to see journalists, commentators on social media, and I wonder if there isn't an area of abuse there because they're seen as influencers and they can equally be part of the problem.
I've always found it curious, Peter, that if you are a journalist and also engage in social media and Facebook, you're actually engaging in street fights. There's no code of conduct there. And if you get bruised, don't say the media is under attack, because it's a free-for-all there. Whereas in the media, there are codes of good practice, and any deviations on your part or your stakeholders will be easily revealed because the codes are there and the rules are clear. What is happening is that if I go to a street fight, and there are other street fighters there, why should I think I'm an honorable street fighter than the other people on the street? So do realize the hazards of being on social media, because there you're not representing the profession, you're representing yourself, and your views and your opinions are unmediated, so are the other people who are competing with you. So it's an open game.
Yeah.
So don't...
Be prepared for a blood nose.
Yeah. And don't what you call construe what happens to you as attack to the media, because you have engaged.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks very much indeed. We'll continue to chat, and when we come back after the break, we're starting a new feature here, certainly for the next few weeks, and we're going to be talking and getting reports from young journalists in training on our university campuses across the country, and the first one's coming up right after this.
We do not just speak, we let every voice in our nation find full expression in language and in culture. We do not just teach, we empower all people with education. We do not just bring you the news, we place you where the news is happening. We do not just entertain, we take you on journeys. We do not just broadcast sport, we create an arena for sporting heroes to inspire you. Ours is not just a job, it's a calling to ensure that everyone in our nation is informed, educated, and entertained. We're able to do this because you do your part. SABC TV licenses. It's all made possible by you. Get the facts first.
In 1994, ek dink was ons almal was ook baie excited geweest.
For South Africa, art was never a good thing.
From a footballing point of view, there was never a separation.
Get to the truth.
There's still some serious issues in South Africa.
Maar ek dink die regering kan regtig probeer om harder te werk om
ke apartheid in Sutlile ke le ke so ke batho ba rena ba democracy batho ba batsho e se magoa.
See what it all really means.
Ek is geel, want dit is die kleur in die verkeerslig wat vir jou sê wees versigtig.
I still give South Africa red.
We are somewhere in between.
We're giving our democracy a green for sure. We're very happy.
Democracy Gauge, weekdays at 5:30 on SABC News, Channel 404.
Welcome back. You're watching Media Monitor. Now, South Africa has on average a very young population, and with the May 8 elections now just around the corner, the youth vote is one that's being talked about significantly. Disturbingly though, despite the population growth, the number of 18 to 19-year-olds who've registered to vote is down almost half from 2014's general election. Now, for the next 4 weeks, we'll have a special slot on Media Monitor to hear from young people themselves about this and other election issues, as we invite journalism students from around the country to tell their stories from campus. We begin this week with a report from Privilege Ramakokovu, who is a second-year journalism student from the Tshwane University of Technology.
6 million young people eligible to vote did not bother to register for the elections. I am at the Tshwane University of Technology's North Campus in Soshanguve to find out whether this is a surprising figure at all. What priorities have young people placed above going to the polls? Lack of accommodation, struggling to get financial assistance, and in some instances, academic exclusion. These are just some of the struggles students face. But it seems these young people don't believe politics are relevant in providing solutions for them.
Before we get jobs after graduating, we have to have the 5-year experience thing. And we cannot vote if we still have that 5-year experience thing.
They all make promises, so I don't know which party will deliver on their promises.
Instead of politics, students say the only way they can be heard is by taking action. That means regular strikes every time there's an issue to be addressed.
When there's no action, that's what youth and students actually believe is the right thing to do.
As students, we notice that if we want things, we have to do action.
One student leader says they can't help but go to the picket lines if policies don't favor the students.
Remember, the decision, when they take it, it must come back to us. It is implemented upon us. So if that decision is not suiting us, obviously we'll revolt to activism and strikes and other things.
Most students who have chosen not to vote say they'll address issues by donning tools and striking. They say that's the only way they believe their voice can be heard. Privilege Ramakokobu, TUT, Soshanguve.
Well, it's my great pleasure now to talk on the line to that budding journalist who I think her work is really great. Privilege, thanks very much for joining us on the line. When you did this report, I guess you had a sense of some of the things that came out. Did it surprise you why young people aren't bothering to vote?
Yes, thank you for having me, Peter. It did surprise me very well because we found out of 9 million people who are not registered to vote, most of them, 6 million, of the youth who are not registered to vote. And it was very surprising, because in South Africa, we, the youth, we are the future of South Africa. And from my own point of view, we cannot practice democracy when our young people don't even know what democracy means out there. And another thing, it's very rare to see IEC on campus, teaching our students about elections and the importance of voting. So that's how I see it.
All right. So do you think this is a general feeling that youth prefer to march and take action on the streets rather than engaging, as you said, in this democratic tool that they can have, which is voting?
Well, I'm going to be honest with this because I'm also a student of TUT. So, yes, we prefer taking action at school, rather than doing things according to the law of the school. Because when we present our mandate, our memorandums, they take time to respond to the students. So that's why we always take action so that our voice can be heard. So I think more our youth believe in activism rather than politics, Yes.
All right, as a journalism student, perhaps now you can tell me about the things that you're being taught. Do you think that the courses are keeping up with the world that you're living in and the environment that you find yourself as a young reporter?
Well, let me say, UNESCO identified TUT journalism as one of the best top centers of journalism in Africa. So I'd like to believe that we are being prepared for the very industry that this platform practices under, so we are basically given practicals to do, most importantly. We go out and cover stories. We get scrutinized when we come back that you need to focus on being objective rather than subjective. We are taught that we need to get all the sides of the story. For example, in my institution, on the journalism side, in second year level of journalism, we have practical subjects, 4 practical subjects that we do. It is broadcasting, where we go out and cover stories, where we take visuals and do PTCs and so on for television. Secondly, we go to newspaper, we write articles and go out, take photographs for those articles. And thirdly, we do online journalism. And of course, it is radio that we do. We are able to put things into practice, since we have our own TUT station. And what I appreciate about my lectures is that they always come through for us, and examine our stories to tell us what we could have done better. So that's the most important thing. I think we are well equipped enough at TUT on the practical side.
Okay, and perhaps as a final question, what do you think that old people like me and our institutions, our newspapers, our TV stations could be doing better to reach young people to watch and listen to the news?
Well, can you just repeat your question?
I was just saying, young people, we know a lot of them catch their news perhaps on Twitter, and they're not really reading newspapers and so on and so forth. How can the traditional media do better to reach younger people? Because again, you talked about the need for educating them regarding democracy and voting. But if they're not reading papers, they're not watching news, and they're relying on 120 characters on Twitter, maybe something needs to change.
Yes, something needs to change, especially on this thing of industrial revolution. We are living in the advance of technology, So I think that maybe there needs to be a slight adjustment in terms of how we can use this new technology that is becoming a force to be reckoned with, But it shouldn't change the fact that, the storytelling itself,
All right. Privileged. Thank you so much for talking to us. We look forward to what I believe is probably going to be a sterling career. Second-year journalism student producing work like that. Gentlemen, I suppose no surprises. 6 million out of 9 million potential voters not bothering to register and to vote. That is alarming.
You know, people ask themselves a question. I'll register, I'll vote, and then what? You know, it's still more of the same. But I think this speaks to lack of engagement of young people by the authorities, by government, even by us as the media. You know, how many times do journalists, even from the SABC, how many times do you go to that campus where she is? You only go there when they are banning something. You don't talk to them otherwise. They are not engaged. It's the same thing with Alexandra, which we are going to talk to, I believe, that you have unengaged citizens, people that are not engaged. We don't bother about people who are in the townships, where the majority of South Africans are, by the way, townships and rural areas. I mean, if you take the SABC, for instance, I used to work here. I don't think that you even have a satellite office in Soweto. Okay, you are in Auckland Park. You know, E-News is at Hyde Park. Sunday Times is at no one. We just completely forgotten about people. We only listen to them when they're banning something, and that's an indictment on us as the media and commentators, just as much as it is an indictment on the government. And a final thought for you?
I think it's a reflection of hopelessness. The youth, by staying away, are not finding a qualitative difference between a system that was fought and defeated with a new system that has been inaugurated by liberators. The reality that is hitting us so rudely is that liberators are just as corruptible as the oppressors, and they have not made a better case for themselves in the past 25 years. And that is responsible for the hopelessness we see, and it translates in people saying, what's the point? Rather, stay home.
That's quite a sad indictment. Thanks so much indeed for your thoughts on that. Okay, let's take another quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to start looking at our newspapers and also an international link-up to Namibia.
We were there at the birth of a new nation. We are here today as her democracy matures. An impartial and independent witness to history, SABC News, always there when South Africa decides. On Trends Travel, we bring you a full guide on all things lifestyle related. With so much to discover, we give you comprehensive reviews of places to visit, music, travel, and food. We also explore the arts, whether on or off stage. All this and more, be sure to tune into Trends Travel, Saturdays at 5:30 p.m.
Right, time now for us to take a look at the newspapers, and we start with one of our new features, which is getting an international view of the front pages from a country on the continent. And today we go to neighbouring Namibia, and taking us through headlines there is the editor-in-chief of the Namibian, Tangeni Ampadi. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, Tangeni. We don't have a lot of time, so let's go straight into the newspapers there. There's no weekend papers, so the papers you've got came out on Friday. Which one is the first one we're looking at?
We're first looking at an Afrikaans newspaper called the Republican. Afrikaans is still a major language in Namibia, even though it's not the official language. But you will see that the main story there, and it's a big splash, it's about rain. We have struggled getting rain. We are going through a really tough drought. So the bit of rain that we get makes a lot of news. So the newspaper covers used pictures of heavy hail that appeared in the eastern part of the country.
All right. And then second paper?
The second paper is a government-owned and run newspaper called New Era. It has a mishmash of stories on its cover about SADC, about the cyclone Idai, and one key story at the top of the newspaper is about job losses in the fishing industry.
Right.
I will elaborate more on that when we come to our newspaper, because it's a similar story we have.
All right. So your newspaper is the Namibian, and you're the editor-in-chief. Tell us about the story that you decided to lead with.
We decided to lead with a story about, how do I put it? It's literally a decimation of the little forests, the little jungle we have. There have been a huge increase in the felling of trees for timber. These are trees that are as old as 400 years old, and they are being cut mainly for export to China. So the government has been struggling to stop that. There are obviously vested interests even within government, among government leaders. So that's the main story we lead with, and it's been going really since last year.
All right, and I guess
illegal exportation of timber.
With a country that is largely desert, trees are very, very important. Tangeni, we're going to have to leave it there, but thanks very, very much indeed for giving us a view of what's happening in Namibia. Thanks for your time.
Thanks a lot, Peter.
All right, let's come back to home, South Africa. Gentlemen, there's a lot happening in the papers, and understandably most of it to do with our politicians. Let me start with you, Opa, this time. What story grabbed your attention? Which paper?
The story that grabbed me, it's in the Sunday Times. It's about Alexandra Politics Fuels Despair and Rage in Alex. If you look at Alex, it is a story that replicates the experiences in many townships. What brings it to the fore is because it's becoming a threat to the nearest area of wealth, that is Sandton. Probably if there was no Sandton near Alex, there would not have been as much agents as we see now today. But what is worrying is that in 2001, I think, 1.3 billion was allocated for Alex renewal project. There isn't a demonstrable difference that money has impacted in Alex, and there's an inquiry now, and I think with Mayor Mashaba starting a forensic investigation into this amount of money, we may know what happened to it.
To the money.
But what this indicates is that there is money in this country, and if it's allocated correctly, quality of life would be better than what we see today.
All right, so finger pointing, a lot of finger pointing happening this week.
Yeah.
It was you, no, it was you.
Yeah.
And I suppose understandably towards the elections, but the people at home are making up their minds based on what they hear. Do you think the political parties are really thinking through their strategy around these?
You know, Peter, this is a symptom of this amazing, apathy, even from the media's part, around this election. You know, it's like there isn't going to be an election in a few weeks' time. The people are not engaged in the election process. And I think that is the fault of the media, to be honest with you. Because what you guys do, you follow the politicians when they do this door-to-door campaigning, and there is no intellectual engagement at all. There is no debate. So this is about optics, you know, that the Secretary General walked into this house and he gave someone 400 rand for groceries. Because there is no discussion about what the election is about. This election should be about the economy. It should be about jobs. You don't hear any of that. All that you see is the president at Park Station, the president telling somebody to go take off her pajamas. There is nothing that makes people say, this is an election time. Let me hear what the ANC is promising compared to what the DA is promising, compared to what the EFF is promising, and so on and so on. We haven't even had one national debate between the leaders of the leading parties, because we're told that the office of the president is refusing to grant that. But it will refuse because it's not getting any pressure from the journalists, and they know that they are not going to accede to that request of the debate, but you'll be there following them when they're doing the easy stuff. I think that's what is happening in Alexandra and other places. It just shows that it's communities that are not engaged, because they are saying, if all of these parties have launched their manifestos, the people should have been able to say, okay, we like the manifesto of this party, so we are going to vote for that party so that it can solve our problems that we are experiencing. But because all that this is about is just visiting people, leave a t-shirt, that is not going to make people feel engaged about an election.
All right, we're running out of time. What was the story that grabbed your attention?
The story that grabbed my attention again is the story of the contribution that was made by Ace Mahashule.
City,
yes, it's Sunday Times.
Sunday Times as well, front page.
You know, Ace Mahashule makes a point that is persuasive for me. He says, I cannot walk into somebody's house. This person is taking medication, doesn't have enough food. There's no fridge. There was no food in the fridge. I couldn't just walk out without making a contribution. Now, but where I fault him, it is that he did it in front of the cameras.
Right.
Doing it in front of the cameras changes the whole thing. And also, I don't think that it is a smart decision politically, because now it simply means every time you go into somebody's house, they're going to tell you that they don't have food in the fridge. And I don't know if he or other members of the ANC would have enough money to be giving out 400 rands to every family that is poor. There are many poor families in South Africa.
All right. And your thought on that story?
Well, it's a handout. One. Two, it's an opportunistic display of compassion at the cost of 400 rands. And as Makosini says, it puts him in good light. But it's more expedient than real, because if you were to address the conditions of the person now receiving 400 rands, how does that continue to sustain the person beyond an empty fridge in the absence of Mahashule?
All right, gentlemen, I wish we had more time. So much to discuss, particularly on this Sunday. Thanks so much indeed for your insights. And you mentioned public debates between the leaders. Well, what we're going to do today on the SABC News Channel at 3 o'clock, we're going to take you back 25 years when F.W. de Klerk debated Nelson Mandela. And that set in motion, of course, this new democracy that we're enjoying. So make sure you're a part of that. 3 o'clock this afternoon on the SABC News Channel. That's it for Media Monitor. Have a great week, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Bye-bye.